One of these days, somebody is going to have to give Paul Joseph Watson an award. I don't know where he finds these stories, but these are pure gold. And in our quest here to determine the truth of climate change, it's interesting to look into the mind of the activists and see where they're coming from. Take this one in particular. Climate activist leaves environmentalist movement because it's too white. A Filipino climate activist wrote an article for Vice saying she left the environmental movement because it was, quote, too white. And here she is. Her name is Karin Louise Hermes. And before we have too much fun laughing about this, I just want to point out, this is a young person. This is a very young-looking girl. I suspect she's, probably not even 23. And she's going to look back on this phase in her life and cringe and laugh and talk about her idealism. And probably, maybe someday she'll be voting for Donald Trump Jr. Anyway, so Paul writes, those awful white people, and they're trying to save the planet. And here we have Karin Louise Hermes writing, the climate movement is overwhelmingly white, so I walked away, Hermes said, accusing her fellow tree huggers of exploiting her for woke token diversity points. Well, and this is kind of the pitfall of affirmative action. They want all this representation of people of color in every level of bureaucracy and in schools, but then you start giving people positions not because of their ability, but because of their skin color. And then, maybe she was the best person for this job, but you're never going to feel like you really earned it if we have quotas and whatnot, because you think, well, I'm the first black female to go to college in my family. I really did something. But there's always going to be this gnawing doubt in the back of your mind, and it's like, did I really do it? Or was I just this woke token diversity coin? And I was just there to make wealthy, influential white people feel better about themselves. And so that's a two-edged sword about getting these things for free. She goes on to say, after a while, I realized I would only be called upon when climate organizations needed an inspiring story or a diverse voice, context for a campaign, or to participate in a workshop for fun. Oh God, no, not fun. When everyone else on the all-white project was getting paid. I don't know the reasoning there. I assume she was a volunteer. Generally, I don't accept jobs that pay me $0. That's just kind of my usual policy, but, who knows. Here's her article in Vice. Hermes' main bone of contention appears to be that her white comrades didn't adequately embrace the notion of intersectionality, which basically means using climate change alarmism as a vehicle to push all your other demented far-left political demands. But, we can all see this. You can see this going back to global cooling. You can see this when it was called global warming. And then in the legal term, they used something called distinction without a difference, or in philosophy, it is a logical fallacy called a phantom distinction, and it went from being called global warming to climate change. However, none of the problems, solutions, causes, or effects changed whatsoever. There's no difference between the two. They're just trying to hide through using sophistry. And the problem with warming is it only seemed to be working when it was warming. Now that you call it change, well, things constantly change, and then you're caught in that little equivocal discussion on things. So it was a neat little trick, and the funny thing is how many people just took that right in stride. Anyway, she says anti-racism and anti-capitalism need to be made part of organizing. I don't know how you're going to solve the problem through central planning. The government can't hardly do anything. we have more. If green policies fail to consider anti-racism, so if anti-pollution policies don't consider anti-racism and migrant rights, that means open borders, right? That means bringing third world people to the first world where they will then pollute more. But she explains, how is any person of color supposed to feel? Oh, the feelings? Dude, we got science to discuss here. We got to save the earth. Feelings, we can deal with feelings once the imminent fireball we're about to be engulfed with is handled, right? 12 years to live? But no, it's migrant rights and how people of color feel. Voting for them or organizing in the same spaces. What bizarre pretzel logic leftists are able to employ. And this is when you start with a lie and you won't admit that a lie is a lie, it really takes you down this bizarre rabbit hole where it's like you've got to lie to bulwark your other lies, and the next thing you know, it's this whole huge mess. And actually, this is something you see a lot in addiction. Alcoholics or drug addicts, they lie to themselves about their problem, and they just spiral out of control till they hit rock bottom. And then at some point, they have to start moving in a positive direction. And what is the first step? The first step is saying something that is true. You say, I am Joe Blow, and I'm an alcoholic. And for a lot of people that have had, decade-long addictions to alcohol, that may be the first truth they've spoken in 10 years. And so, you can see this is ideological madness rather than chemical dependency, but there are parallels to this. So let's look more at this girl here. Hermes apparently made activist leaders uncomfortable by drawing attention to their lack of diversity. Uncomfortable, or maybe just confused them. Whenever I would question the whiteness of these spaces and how strategies didn't take race into account, I would be met with an uncomfortable silence because they're talking about the impact of CO2 on the environment, and you're talking about the skin color of people in the room. Maybe because that's not particularly relevant to the case that they're making. But everyone's got their priorities. She writes, asserting the mostly white activist leaders were not paying enough attention to what whiteness, capitalism, and inequality have to do with climate change. Well, whiteness, this made-up word here, did lead to capitalism, which is an economic system which has produced the most wealth that any system ever has, and has lifted people out of inequality at a rate so fast, actually half of the world now is considered middle class. That's 4 billion people. Capitalism has done a lot of good. Plus, a lot of these solutions are coming from entrepreneurs, not centralized, organized government committees. It's coming from businessmen. They're looking at these various solutions to what I think isn't even a problem in the first place. But this is what's going to solve global warming. Anyway, she highlights how eco-warriors push veganism as the solution, yet refuse to acknowledge how people have been killed after producing against the sourcing of plant-based foods like palm oil on indigenous lands. Oh, yeah, liberal hypocrisy knows no ends. In summary, Hermes accurately nails how climate activists use non-white people as human shields. Boy, that's a great turning word. Human shields for their arguments. They do this with the children. I've been using Owen Benjamin's Child Soldiers, because that's a great one too, but I think I'm going to start using human shields, because a lot of this woke stuff is like armor. It is to protect you from even being able to criticize an idea. Because look, the 21-year-old Filipino girl said it. You're not going to call her an alarmist. Let's see. So, Climate activists are using non-white people as human shields for their arguments, but her own inherent racism towards white people also shines through, given the fact that most of this took place in Berlin, which is still 71% ethnic German. I would like to emphasize there's no such thing as white. There is, however, ethnic German. So, a few people on Twitter had their fun. This guy says, as a cisgendered hetero white man, I'm doing my part by not joining the climate movement. Ha ha ha. Whoops. The authors of the Emancipation Proclamation are overwhelmingly white, so I continued my life as a slave. That's just ruthless. Lord Muckington said, Vice is overwhelmingly shite, so I walked away. That is a true statement. Speaking truth, the passengers on my bus were overwhelmingly Asian, so I walked off. Man. Speech does not equal violence said, or more honestly, no one paid special attention to me because of my skin color on an issue totally unrelated to it, so I walked away. And Just You Wait said, Vice articles are overwhelmingly cringe, so I walked away. And this is just a good one to show, if you know people that are still kind of falling for this silliness, it is interesting that the solution to climate change is always leftist ideological goals, and now it's just getting ridiculous. We have to have open borders because of climate change for some reason, and it just gets more hilarious. I think it's also interesting. George Soros is pressuring YouTube to block content like this on YouTube. I always thought, when I was in math class as a kid, the teacher had the answer to the math problems, and they would say, does anybody have any questions? They wanted questions. They wanted pushback. They wanted discussion because they could explain it. When you have an answer, you welcome a challenge because you want to show people the answer. You want to show them the truth. People that are just hiding behind rhetoric and continually using logical fallacies and distinction without a difference or phantom distinctions to hide their case, and these emotional, token people of color to use as human shields so that the ideas can't be challenged and you get them censored on YouTube or shadow banned. This is not the behavior of people that have all the answers.